Today is Wednesday, the 7th of November, 1990. I'd like to begin, if you could just tell us what your maiden name was and when you were born, and to also tell us where you were born.
I have been born and I lived all my life in Warsaw, Poland. I was born in October 27, 1922, so you can count my age now. And what else did you want to know?
And whereabouts?
My maiden name.
Yeah.
R-U-B-I-N.
Right. And how many brothers and sisters?
I was the only child. So you can imagine what a spoiled brat I was. My father was a dentist with a very well developed practice. And he had many Polish patients, which helped me in my later years very much. My mother was the chief bookkeeper in one of the biggest banks in Warsaw. So we were not wealthy, but we were very well off. And with me alone, we could live a very comfortable life.
What were the names of your mother and father?
Celina and Daniel. And I gave this name to my oldest child, to my son.
In terms of your growing up as a child, were you in a religious Jewish family? Or
no, ours was a non-religious family. We knew we were Jewish. My parents, insofar that my parents were going to the synagogue 3 times a year during the most important holidays. And they always refused to say we are assimilated. So there must have been something to it. We also had a little box like a pig bank with the inscription Keren Kayemet on it, which means that it was for the Jewish aims for Israel. And it was standing near the telephone. So every patient who wanted to telephone was supposed to drop some money, and it was my father's special satisfaction that Polish people were giving money to Keren Kayemet. That's all I know about the religiousness of my parents. Otherwise, the language used at home was only Polish, and always Polish. When they wanted to say something for me not to understand, they were using Yiddish. Strangely enough, I always knew what it was all about. I don't know how, but I understood.
Did you go have any form of Jewish education, or did you?
No. I was going to a Jewish school, yes. It was a private school for girls speaking Polish from homes like mine, but it was a Jewish school. And one day I remember my mother was being asked by a friend or patient of my father's, why don't you send her to a Polish school, since everybody speaks Polish there anyway? And my mother said, I want to spare her sufferings ahead of time. Ahead of schedule, she said. That's why I am sending her to a Jewish school. So that was about all. I was never going to a synagogue or practicing or anything.
Was there a choice of going to Polish schools, or did most Jewish families that you knew of send their children to a Jewish school?
Yes, there were Jewish schools, and there were pure Polish schools. You could send your child, it was not a communist Poland, you could send your child wherever you wanted. My mother chose this very school, and I'm grateful till now, because I learned a good Polish, which also was of great use to me later on. At the same time, I didn't suffer from anti-Semitism or any signs of dislike or alienating me from the other girls. The schools at that time were separate for boys and separate for girls. There was no co-education.
Do you recall your address in Warsaw during childhood? Where you
Well, I will say it in Polish, Złota Street, which means Gold Street.
And
73. It was an apartment.
And was the community in that area quite mixed, both Jewish and
Yes.
non-Jewish? And
Right. There were many Jews, and this particular place found itself later on when the Germans came and they created ghetto and they built up a wall around us. We were inside, which means at first we didn't have to move. We were very fortunate.
so
Which means Polish people had to move out, and we didn't have to move in.
What was the first sort of occasion that you recall in your family that you ever heard anything about what was politically outside Poland, and particularly in Germany, with the rise of Hitler and
Well,
the
it was in exactly in 1933 when Hitler grabbed the power. We have known right away. My mother was very involved in politics. She was interested, and she was suffering very much from what was going on. So we knew from the start that it's going to be very, very bad. Something very bad is going to happen. Then I remember people saying that Hitler was a wonderful orator, yes? Orator. And my mother bought a special, very strong and very good radio, Telefunken. I remember the name because it was something to be proud of, to listen to his speeches. And she did. She knew the German language very well. And she said, yes, he is wonderful, as far as his abilities, his talents go.
And at that time when he came to power in Germany, was there any thought or talk within your own family of thinking about leaving, or was it?
Yes, my mother was thinking about leaving. She had 3 brothers in Canada. She didn't keep in touch with them because she didn't speak or write English, for a change. But she had them, she knew about it, and she wanted to talk my father into emigrating. But he used to say, I don't see any place where I will be better off than here. He was very happy where he was. He didn't see that far. He didn't want. He just refused. I remember my mother saying, one day she said, well, if father doesn't want, I will take you one day and to emigrate. And later on, during the occupation, during the last month of her life, she said, I don't think I'll survive, but if you do, if you happen to survive, please leave this country, go to America. This is an unfortunate country for us and for everybody. There is war here every 20 years. She turned out not to be right, but that's what she said. And I want you to go and promise that you will go. So I promised. And then I lost her very soon after. But what I'm telling you took place much, much later.
Mm-hmm. And at the time, in the early 30s, was there much talk of going to Palestine among the Jewish people you knew? Or was
Jewish young people, I know about young boys. Mm-hmm. Girls didn't. But boys wanted to go to Palestine, yes. And I remember there was a split between us. Some of the Jewish young girls and boys were very communistic, I'm sorry to say. And some of them were Zionists. They wanted to go to Palestine, buy a big chunk of land. Look at the map, how big the whole country is now. And nobody was really willing to move anywhere. We would much rather stay where we were and be happy.
And were many of your friends non-Jewish Poles? Did you mix sort of with both the Jewish community and the non-Jewish community?
At first, yes, and then it started to make a difference. It started to be kind of important to the Poles and to the Jews to separate themselves from each other. The anti-Semitism rose, developed, and was stronger and stronger. what I remember is one very unpleasant moment right before the war started, but before the war, when a lady was sitting in our dining room. She was waiting for my father to, she was his patient, and she was Polish, and she started to accuse the Jews. She started to say that deep inside they are right to dislike Jews because the Jews are no good. She dared to say that in our house, in our presence. And my mother was got so nervous about it that she said loud, I don't know how to translate it. She said Jews would do the best thing if they all died. And that's exactly what happened there a few years later. I remember it because it made such a big impression on me. That was the way the Polish people were looking at us already, blaming us for whatever was possible and impossible. And that's how my mother took it.
And that attitude started in the mid-30s that you noticed? When did you notice?
Before that, I didn't notice it, but it existed. Polish people were always anti-Semitic. Some of the Polish people were very decent people, and they helped me a lot. I remember my father was in best terms with some patients. After Hitler's coming to power, it changed for worse. It certainly did. It started with some accidents at the university. Polish students were hitting the Jewish students. There was blood on the street, and that's when it started. And that's when my mother started to talk about emigrating.
And roughly what sort of year was that the incidents at the university happened?
Here I can make a mistake, I'm afraid. I think it was 1936 or something like that.
When
and later.
When things like the Nuremberg laws were enacted in Germany.
Nuremberg laws? Yes,
when the very restrictive laws against Jews were put into place in Germany, is that something that you were very aware of in Poland?
Absolutely,
and
yes. We knew that things are going from bad to worse and that we are going to pay for it. And we are more and more aware of the fact that things are going to be very dangerous for us. And Polish people, out of their own initiative, their own will, became very mean. It wasn't only because next door, at the neighbor country, something very bad was going on. They were mean too. They always disliked us. Well, where are Jews not disliked? So we felt, yes, we felt the Polish anti-Semitism very strongly.
Did you yourself have any incidents that happened directly to you?
No, I can't say that. No. With one exception, but then I was a little child and I didn't know I was Jewish. I didn't realize it until I was 9 years old. My mother had a friend, and the friend had a daughter or granddaughter, I don't remember, my age, and we were playing together. I never knew that I was different from her. And one day she came to the park and she told me that she learned a wonderful and very funny song. And she started to sing this song, and it was very anti-Semitic. But I didn't understand about somebody named Joine and things. I don't know if you know, Joine is a very unpleasant name for a Jew. Anyway, I learned it right away, of course. And upon our arrival home, on our way home, I told my mother because we were about to say goodbye to each other as usual. I told my mother that I learned a very funny song, and I started to sing it right on the street. And my mother grabbed me. She didn't even say goodbye. I started to cry. The two ladies, I mean the lady and the girl, went away. And then my mother said, "It's time that I tell you. I want to talk to you." And we sat down, and she told me that what being Jewish meant, and that I was Jewish. That's how I got the news. But it was way before, when I was 9 years old. Up till then, I didn't know anything about it.
Right, but before then, had you been to the synagogue before you were 9 years old? Or?
I've never been to a synagogue. I've been in a synagogue twice in my life. Once it was the beginning of the school year, I remember. And the second time I don't even remember. Later on, I remember what happened to me, and it was connected with a rabbi and a synagogue during the war. But this was late. This is another story.
During the time leading up to the war, do you recall any official government-led measures which were put into place against Jews in Poland?
Yes. First of all, there was difficulty with being admitted to the university. If you wanted to study, it was difficult. And this we have already foreseen that it is going to be a trouble for me. I wanted to study medicine. It was hard. It was almost impossible. The Polish university authorities claimed a law which was called numerus clausus. I don't know if you know what it is. Numerus clausus means that there is a certain amount of Jews that can be admitted, and that's it. And it was comparatively not so bad, because it was 10%, and Jews were 10% of the whole population. So it was in accordance to our amount of Jews. But then they said they want numerus nullus, which means no Jews at all. And then the war broke out. They forgot about everything. They lost the university and everything. So it stopped being that important. Later on, two years later, in the ghetto, the Jewish Polish professors of university organized a clandestine university in the ghetto, inside the ghetto. They were teaching, as far as I know, it was medicine, and I don't know what else, because I was interested only with medicine. And I enrolled. I was learning for 2 years. It was, the level of the studying was really high. I could compare it with what happened later. And we were very happy that I could be admitted, because it may be easier after the war for me to proceed with the studies. That's what we had in mind at first. It was the first 2 years of the German occupation, and it was inside the ghetto. We had identification cards as students and everything. And first of all, we had very good professors.
Do you recall after the events such as Anschluss, when Hitler moved into Austria, was there any reaction to that?
We were watching all the events exactly like we watch Saddam Hussein now. And we are very worried now that history repeats itself, because everybody was for the appeasement of Hitler. And you certainly all remember, you don't remember, but you know about Neville Chamberlain, who came after the Anschluss of Austria with a piece of paper or whatever it was, and he was so proud, and he said he signed. Hitler signed a treaty or an agreement. And it wasn't worth even as much as the worth of the paper it was written on. Yes, of course, we were very much involved with everything. And that's why we feel so bad now about what is going on. Because we can see some parallels.
In that period of time, did your parents make any sort of plans, contingency plans, in case things got worse in Poland?
Contingency, which means
did they
what?
make any plans to
emigrate?
Sort of to emigrate or to hide somewhere?
No, hiding didn't come yet, no. We're thinking about emigrating, yes. But somehow we left these plans. My father had all his family in Warsaw. My mother came from a smaller town, but she also had her family there. So it was kind of hard to decide to go. And as a matter of fact, I think at that time, the United States abolished the number of people they were willing to admit. So it kind of crossed with our plans, and we left the plans. We have always had the feeling, later on, that the Jews from America, who are supposed to be very wealthy and very powerful, didn't help us as much as they could. This may sound like an accusation, but that was our feeling. Everybody felt the same way, me included.
Did you feel that during the war, or is that something you felt later in life, looking back?
All I remember is that a parcel came one day from Canada, and we were so excited. The parcel was big, and there must have been a letter in it, and it was from my mother's brothers. So we were very excited about it, and when we unpacked it, we found quite a few kilograms, maybe 3 kilograms of soap inside. The soap was of good quality, but this was not what we were looking for. And my family was not any worse than any other family. They just didn't understand. They didn't realize. At that time, we were already hungry, and we didn't care for soap that much. So it looked like nobody understood, nobody was really involved. I think now, and I always thought that the fate of the Eastern Jews was not that imminent to the Western Jews, to the German Jews who considered themselves something better. So maybe nobody cared. I don't know.
Did your mother ever try to communicate to her brothers how bad the situation was getting?
At first, in the very beginning. Later on, you couldn't send a letter. You couldn't mail a letter. We were absolutely isolated from the Polish side of Warsaw, let alone Canada.
That happened presumably after the war, after the invasion of Poland, that separation occurred.
Yes. Before, my mother tried to get in touch with them. I know that she received some letters. I don't even know in which language they were written. Certainly not in Polish, and not in English, and not in Jewish, so I don't know. I really don't know. She tried to be in touch, but it didn't work out very well.
Do you recall any incidents where non-Jewish friends of your family tried to stand up to some of the anti-Jewish things that were going on?
Well, they were not exactly stand up against it, no, not that far, but they tried to help, yes. I remember a lady who named herself a very good friend of my father's. She was really nice and sweet and everything. And she was very excited about, emotional about our being closed, being surrounded by the wall, because it didn't start like that. It happened a few months later after they invaded us. So she came to our place and she said, whatever can be done, and we know better than you people that you are not going to be happy here. So maybe you have something valuable. Give it to us. We'll preserve it. I remember we gave her some fur coats of my mother's, and we did well because fur coats were forbidden by the Germans later on. It was in a big chest, much bigger than a suitcase. We packed everything that was of value and we gave it to her, and she came with a policeman. Policeman played a big role in my life later on. Her brother-in-law happened to be a policeman, a big shot, not a plain policeman. So he came and he picked this whole thing up and brought it to her place.
So the policeman involved was sympathetic to trying to
He was
help.
an anti-Semite, and he said it openly. I come here because my sister-in-law made me. That's how he behaved. I remember it because it was very painful. It was like a slap in the face. He helped because somebody from his family asked him to do that. So here I am. What do you want? And we gave him this whole thing.
And he was needed to protect it on its journey.
Yes. He brought it to her house. If he were he not a policeman, he wouldn't be able to bring a big thing like that, because the Germans would certainly approach him.
When did this
So
occur?
he did help, half-heartedly. Do you speak French?
No, a little.
À contre-cœur. Against his own heart, he did it.
When did this occur? Was it? Do you remember roughly the month or the year that this happened?
It was in 19... I would rather avoid naming years, because somebody after reading it could say, well, at that time you weren't yet closely surrounded by the wall or something like that. I may be mistaken, but I think it was in 1941.
Okay.